There's a Twitter user named JP Brammer, and he's an LGBTQ Mexican-American who grew up in Oklahoma. And in fact, I think it was rural Oklahoma. He said he mostly lived around white people. So that's an interesting situation to be in. If you're an LGBTQ Mexican-American growing up around mostly white people in rural Oklahoma. I mean, wow, that's got to be an eye-opening experience. But somebody sent this to me on Twitter, and I apologize for not remembering who's the one who sent it to me. But he did a tweet storm after the election that broke down Trump's appeal in a way that I think is honestly the most accurate and spot-on attempt to discuss the Trump phenomenon. So let me show you what he said here. He starts off by saying, so I'm a Mexican-American from a poor, rural, mostly white town in Oklahoma. Missing from this debate, how poor whites see themselves. So let's pause just to reflect on the fact that you usually get two camps when it comes to, hey, why did Trump win? One camp says, and this is usually the people who are more tied in with establishment Democrats and more on the side of Hillary Clinton, they usually say, well, it's just the racism and the bigotry and the sexism and the xenophobia. That's why he won. And notice, that's kind of a convenient argument for them because then they get to blame Trump winning on the inherent shittiness of everybody who voted for him. So it absolves them of not winning over the people they needed to win over because you go, whatever, they're fucking bad people anyway. They're shitty people, so what are we going to do? So that's the one piece of the puzzle. It's just racists and sexists and bigots and all that. But then the other piece of the puzzle, and this is, people who are more Bernie supporters would say, well, no, it's not that. It's that he did do anti-establishment rhetoric. He did rail against trade. He did say he was going to look out for workers. All he did was talk against TPP in the rallies during the end of the election, at the end of the election in the Rust Belt. And then guess what? He won the Rust Belt and he won the presidency, even though he lost popular vote. So it was the economic populism, which is why he won. Well, I think JP Brammer does a good job here. So he's going to say, and this is an argument that I've made, it's both things. Plenty of people voted for him because he's a bigot, and they agreed with those bigoted policies. But then there are many people who overlooked his bigotry and said, I think he might bust up the establishment, which I want somebody to do, and I think he might look out for my job and protect it from being outsourced. There are people who voted for Obama twice that then voted for Trump. You can't just call them racist and sexist and bigots, because they're not. That's not true. But the answer is both. So it's both of those things is why Trump won. Some people voted for the anti-establishment reason. Some people voted because he's a bigot. I mean, David Duke. He's like, yeah, he hates brown people too. So do I. Well, JP Brammer puts this even more in perspective. He continues, quote, if you're wondering how poor, exploited white people could vote for a dude with a golden elevator who will fuck them over, here's how. They don't see themselves as poor. They don't base their identity on it. They see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. The stigma against poverty is incredibly strong. It is shameful to be poor, to not have the comforts of the middle class. So they pretend that they aren't poor. They are willing to lie to make it seem like they aren't poor. They purchase things to make it seem like they're not. In my town, wealth wasn't associated with greed, but with hard work and inherent goodness. You are blessed if you have material wealth. When they see Trump, they don't see an extortionist who is rich because of the very conditions that keep their own communities in poverty. They see someone who worked hard and was justly rewarded with wealth. Most men, especially, think they too could be Trump, were it not for the unfair obstacles put in their way. White men who don't consider themselves successful enough have so many excuses for their failures. The idea that immigrants are the reason they are poor and not wealthy like Trump is so appealing. It takes all the shame and blame away. And here we have a man who they think tells it like it is and is willing to name the things stealing prosperity out of their hands. If these people saw themselves as an exploited class of people, if American culture didn't stigmatize poverty so much, it might be different. But America has so entangled wealth and goodness and poverty with moral deficiency that they can't build that identity. They won't. Trump is rich, and so according to American criteria, he is also wise, fair, moral, deserving, strong, clever. He has to be. Capitalism and the American dream teach that poverty is a temporary state that can be transcended with hard work and cleverness. To fail to transcend poverty and to admit you are poor is to admit you are neither hardworking nor clever. It's cultural brainwashing. So if an exploited class of people don't want to admit they're exploited and they blame themselves for their oppression, what manifests? Xenophobia. Hatred of anyone who is different. Queer people, people of color. These people are eroding the goodness of America. And if they would just stop ruining America, then the perfect design of America could work again and deliver prosperity. I'm telling you, as someone who has spent almost his entire life in this environment, that if you think cities are a bubble, good God. But the reality is, of course, that these people are indeed exploited and they are victims, even while they victimize others, victimize us. How you balance those realities and what conclusions you reach to improve the lives of both, well, I'm not smart enough to have the answer. Yes, you are smart enough to have the answer because that was a brilliant, brilliant tweet storm there. And it takes that last missing piece of the puzzle that I haven't vocalized. I haven't put it into words and expressed it. Maybe at times I have in other stories, but this really put it front and center. And I had the light bulb effect. I went, oh, that's right. That's the final little missing piece, which is the stigma of poverty. And you see this across the board in the U.S. It's definitely really heavy in Republican circles. If you're poor, you're a bad person to them. So that's your fault. That's your, you're poor? I don't care the other facts that go hand in hand with that. What that shows is a sign of immorality. It shows that you're not a hardworking, decent American. This is why they cut all the social safety net programs. And they feel totally fine in doing that. Because they think, well, that money, those people don't deserve that money. They don't deserve it. This is a handout. This is not an attempt to alleviate extreme poverty that's in existence because of the nature of the system that exploits them and fucks them over. No. They view it as, we're giving these people an unfair hand up, and we're breeding dependence for them to stay on these programs, and it chips away at their moral fiber. And if they're not wealthy, it's because they're not good people. And we look at rich people and we go, oh, that must be because they're a genius. They're clever. They're intelligent. They're the most moral. They know the most stuff. I mean, look at how even a guy like Mark Cuban, who's not smart, he's just not smart. But they treat him like, Mark Cuban couldn't figure out fucking net neutrality. You know, he said, you don't want big government fucking controlling the internet. The fuck are you talking about? So he's with Ajit Pai. He's the only person in the country who agrees with Ajit Pai. Because he's not that smart. He didn't figure out he's not that smart. But because he has a lot of money, people go, ooh, is Mark Cuban going to run against Donald Trump? What the fuck? Why? What are you talking about? Or The Rock. The Rock, who's a movie star. By the way, I like The Rock, so nothing against The Rock personally. But the idea that when we know nothing about what his policy beliefs are, the idea that the media would say, why do The Rock should run against Trump? Why? Why? Because he's rich. He's a megastar, and he's rich, and you know him. He must be good. He's got a shitload of money. He must be good. Goldman Sachs fucked over the entire country. These are people, it's been proven that they would sell packages to unsuspecting clients that were full of the toxic subprime mortgages. They knew that these packages were shit and that eventually they would tank. But they sold it to people and said, hey, you need to get on this because you're going to make a lot of money if you get involved with these packages here, if you invest. So unsuspecting people did that because they thought Goldman Sachs were experts, and they got hosed. So Goldman Sachs committed fraud. They knew this product was shitty. They sold it as if it was good. They made money off those people. And they get, well, I don't see what the problem is. And you still have the CEO of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, public figure. Everybody, he's invited on CNBC. Hey, tell us what you think about X, Y, and Z. Steve Mnuchin, Gary Cohn, people from Goldman Sachs in the Trump administration writing the tax plan, controlling our government policy. In what world does it make sense that these people are proven frauds and criminals? But now polite society treats them, ooh, look, Goldman Sachs, you must be an expert, talk to me. Because they're rich. If you're rich, you're moral. I don't care how you got the money. I don't care about the backstory. I don't give a shit if you exploited everybody and their mother in the process. I don't give a shit if you run, Walmart, for example, or something, where they keep their fucking workers on starvation wages. They don't pay a living wage. They make billions in profits. They pay people less than they can live on. But if you're the CEO or something, Hillary was on Walmart's board. But they treat her, Hillary Clinton, tell me about things, stuff. She was exploiting the fuck out of people. We have an economy that feeds off the exploitation of poor workers and even middle-class workers. You're exploiting these people. Some of the hardest working people I know are in poverty. I know people who work 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They sleep fucking 5 hours a night, 4 hours a night. They have to get up super early, bust ass. They work harder than any fucking CEO I've ever seen. But they make the CEO makes 80 times more than they do. 100 times more, 300 times more. How could that be? Because the system is built on exploitation. But deep in American culture is this notion. If you're poor, it's your fault. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But if only Americans would understand, it's not your fault. Are there some people who are lazy and choose to be lazy and so they don't make a lot of money? I'm sure there's some out there. But the overwhelming majority of people are doing their absolute best to keep their head above water. And it's the nature of the system that keeps them down. Because it's not a system that's fair. It's not a system that's a meritocracy. The fundamental idea in the minds of these poor people who voted for Trump is the country's already a meritocracy, so he made it to the top of it. So we got to respect him because he knows stuff we don't. He has to be brilliant and clever and the most moral. But no. What you don't understand is the system isn't anywhere near a meritocracy. Paris Hilton is massively rich. How did she get that? Is she a genius? No, the fucking inherited wealth. Donald Trump's dad was worth $400 million. He lies and says, I got a small loan of $1 million. First of all, small loan of $1 million? I know people who would die for a small loan of $1 million. But second of all, that was before his dad died. When his dad died, he got way more than that. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He went bankrupt, I think it was over 7 times. All these different bankrupt. Have you ever gone bankrupt? No. So at least in one sense, you're a much better businessman than Donald Trump. So the notion of being wealthy, meaning you're more moral, you're more clever, it's just objectively not true. There are many billionaires who are fucking idiots. There are. And there are many people who are super poor who are geniuses. There's many people who are super poor who are more hardworking than some CEO who sits on his ass. Look at what happened with Wall Street. They bankrupted their companies, crashed the world economy. Then they got bailed out. And then they paid bonuses to the people who made the decisions that bankrupted their companies and crashed the economy. So see how it's rigged? You do well, here's a bonus, here's a tremendous amount of money. You crash the economy and you bankrupt your company, here's the money anyway. So there's no way you can look at this system and say, oh, this is fucking a meritocracy. They're the smartest. That's why they have all the money. No, they rigged the process. Big business bought the government. They rigged the process in their favor against the middle class and against the poor. But if you are infected with that ideology, well, obviously Trump is brilliant because he won. He won at this game because he's the most clever, he's the most moral, he's the most intelligent. Well, you just been had. You've been took. Because that's not true. So here you have a guy who's thrived on exploiting you. Donald Trump committed fraud with Trump University. He called it a university. It wasn't a university. He promised he would make people a lot of money. It did make people a lot of money. He had people who were known con men teaching the class. People who had gone to prison for being con men. They did classic tricks, upselling. Oh, I know you paid however much to get in here, $500, but now you got to pay another $500 if you really want the secrets. It's exploitation. It's fraud. He literally had to pay out millions of dollars because it was fraud. And some people think, oh, this guy's a genius who's just harder working than everybody. No, he's a billionaire exploiting people. Alleged billionaire exploiting people. So that's a great point. So Trump's appeal, yes, there are the people who love Trump because he's a bigot, and he was kind of open about that. There are people who love Trump because they thought he would be anti-establishment and bust up the system. That's definitely part of it as well. They thought, hey, maybe he'll keep my job in the country because he's talking against trade and all that. But then the other piece of the puzzle is there are a lot of people who look at a guy like Trump, and because of the cultural brainwashing that anybody who's rich has to be the hardest working, has to be the most moral, has to be the best. Because of that cultural brainwashing and the fact that Trump acts like that's the case. Oh, I am the most tremendous, unbelievable. They fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And if there was some sort of class consciousness, and if people understood everybody who's middle class and poor is struggling and it's time for us to come together to fight the rich, if they understood that, then there's no way he would have gotten elected. The oldest trick in the book is rich elites pitting the middle class against the poor. And usually it's middle class white people against poor people of color. Doesn't have to be, but oftentimes that's the case. Or it's even poor white people against poor people of color. And you scapegoat. You say, oh, those fucking immigrants are the reason that you're in trouble. The fucking Muslims are the reason. These are the people holding you back. And then they run out the back door with all the money. Blame people who have no money and no power, run out the back door with all the money. Rig the economy in their favor. And then all the while sell to you, no, I'm at this top position in society because I work so hard, and I'm so moral and clever and genius and brilliant. It's all bullshit. It's time for working class people, middle class people, poor people to band together and to realize the same policies would help us all. Medicare for all, living wage, free college, strong unions, ending the wars, reinvesting in our infrastructure at home. Those things help everybody. So it's time to sell that vision and to break free of the cultural brainwashing that led people to believe, well, obviously Trump's a genius because he's rich. He's not. And that's the truth.